I stared at my phone screen for what felt like an eternity. 24 missed calls. All from my brother Jason, my mother Karen, and even my father, who hadn't spoken to me in 2 years. They were all calling me now. But where were they? When I was lying alone in a hospital room last winter, hooked to machines, wondering if I'd even wake up the next day. Where were they when I lost my job, my apartment, and nearly my mind from the loneliness of being shut out by the people who once called me our rock? I remember texting my mom when I got out of surgery. Her response? Glad you're okay. Try not to make everything dramatic, Emily. Dramatic. That's what they called my pain. That's how they explained walking away from me. Now they needed me. And I had a decision to make. Have you ever been abandoned by the people who were supposed to protect you? Comment, I hear you if you've ever felt invisible in your own family. I wasn't always the outcast. In fact, growing up I was the glue, the peacemaker, the one who remembered everyone's birthday, who planned family game nights, who made photo albums for every holiday. We were never a perfect family, but back then, we felt like something close. I grew up in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, in a modest 2-story house with peeling white paint and the same creaky wooden stairs that made it impossible to sneak out as a teen. My mom, Karen, was a teacher at the local elementary school, and my dad, Robert, worked maintenance for the city. Then there was my younger brother Jason, 2 years my junior, and the undisputed golden child. But I didn't mind. Not back then. Jason was charming, smart, always good with words, and even better at making people laugh. I was the quieter one, the sensitive one, my mom used to say, though sometimes it felt more like a warning than a compliment. Still, we were close. All of us. Sunday dinners were sacred. Spaghetti with garlic bread, Mom's strawberry shortcake for dessert. I used to live for those nights, hearing Dad tell the same war stories from his time in the Navy, Mom laughing while correcting every detail. I remember one night, I must have been around 16, when we all sat out on the porch watching the fireflies. My dad put his arm around me and said, "You're the heart of this family, Em. Don't ever forget that." I didn't, but they did. High school passed quietly. I didn't go to parties or get in trouble. I studied, helped Mom with chores, and listened to Jason go on about his new girlfriends, sports victories, and college plans. He got into UCLA on a full ride for soccer. My parents were ecstatic. They hosted a going-away party with banners, cake, even a printed slideshow. When I got accepted to a small liberal arts college in Illinois on a partial scholarship, my mom said, "That's nice, honey. Maybe you'll transfer somewhere bigger later." I told myself it didn't matter, that they were just more excited because Jason was going further. That's what I always did. I made excuses for them. But college was good for me. I found my voice in writing, fell in love with poetry, psychology, and quiet libraries. I worked part-time at a bookstore and took on tutoring gigs to cover what my scholarship didn't. And in my sophomore year, I met Daniel, a tall, soft-spoken guy from Minnesota, majoring in architecture, who had a habit of doodling floor plans on napkins. We met in a coffee shop on campus. I was crying over a terrible statistics grade, and he offered me a free cookie and a napkin sketch of the house of future Emily. He drew a tiny bookshelf by every window. We started dating, and within months I knew he was my person. Kind, patient, thoughtful, the kind of man who remembered my coffee order and left notes in my locker like we were still in high school. He met my family the summer after we started dating. Jason teased him relentlessly. My mom barely looked up from the salad. Dad was polite but distant. I could tell Daniel noticed, but he never said a word. That's the kind of man he was. Graceful in discomfort. We graduated, moved to Chicago, and rented a small apartment on the 3rd floor of a noisy old building with no elevator. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. We spent weekends walking through the city, eating street tacos, and making plans for a future with dogs, kids, maybe even a little home office with fairy lights. But when I called to share the news about our engagement, Mom's first words were, "Already? You sure you're not rushing this?" I paused. "We've been together 3 years, Mom." "Well, I just don't want you to settle. You're very emotional. Maybe you're just attached." That word again. Emotional. Like it was a defect. Jason, meanwhile, had just divorced his second wife and moved back home temporarily, and he was still being treated like the family star. The wedding planning felt more like a solo project than a family celebration. My parents didn't offer to help. Jason didn't show up to the bridal shower. I remember crying in the bathroom stall at the venue tasting, listening to another bride laugh with her mom down the hall. On my wedding day, I looked around during the ceremony and noticed my mother scrolling through her phone. I should have said something. Should have stood up for myself. But I didn't. I just smiled, walked down the aisle, and clung to Daniel like he was the only safe space left in the room. And maybe he was. For a while. Marriage was blissful. We struggled financially, sure. Living off Daniel's entry-level salary and my freelance writing gigs wasn't easy. But we were happy. We made pasta at 2 a.m., danced in the living room, and we made our own traditions, small, sweet things like Sunday crossword challenges and Thursday no-screen nights. We tried to keep the connection with my family alive, inviting them to dinners, sending photos, offering visits. But it was always a one-way street. No one showed up. Jason canceled last minute. My parents sent thinking of you texts without following through. When I asked if I'd done something wrong, my mom said, "No, honey, you're just always so intense." That word burned more than she knew. Then the storm hit. Daniel was diagnosed with lymphoma, stage 3. It felt like the floor vanished from beneath my feet. He tried to be brave, but I saw it in his eyes. The fear. The quiet unraveling of a man who'd always carried others. I called my mom the day we found out. She said, "Oh, that's awful. But don't panic yet. There are treatments. Just stay strong, sweetheart." Then she switched topics. Asked if I'd seen Jason's new house on Facebook. I held the phone to my chest and sobbed after we hung up. They didn't get it. They didn't want to get it. During Daniel's chemo, we barely left the house. I quit my freelance gigs, sold my laptop, rented out our spare room. We were drowning, financially, emotionally, spiritually. And my family? Silence. They knew. They just stayed away. Maybe they thought I was exaggerating. Maybe they didn't care. Maybe I didn't matter. When Daniel passed, I was alone. After Daniel's funeral, I waited. For someone to knock. For someone to call. For my mother to hold me and say she was sorry for not showing up more. For Jason to offer to take me out for coffee and just be my brother. But grief didn't just feel like loss. It felt like abandonment. 3 days after the service, I received a card in the mail from my parents. A generic condolence card, the kind you'd find in the clearance aisle at Walgreens. Inside, in my mother's loopy script, it read, "We know this must be hard. Sending love from afar. Let us know when you're up for visitors." Up for visitors? I was barely up for breathing. They hadn't attended the funeral. My dad had said he had a cold. Jason never even responded to the invite. They didn't send flowers. They didn't even text me the day of. I sat on the couch, that cheap card trembling in my hands, the silence in the apartment heavier than ever. It hit me. This was who they had become to me. Distant. Detached. Unreachable. The weeks that followed were blurry. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. thinking I heard Daniel's cough. I'd cook too much pasta and forget it was just for one. I'd sit on the bathroom floor, holding one of his old t-shirts, just trying to smell him again. And the phone stayed silent. No check-ins. No visits. No, let's get lunch. Or, how are you really? Just more posts from Jason's Instagram about weekend getaways with his new girlfriend, Melissa. More group family photos I wasn't in. More reminders that I didn't belong anymore. When I finally gathered the strength to call my mom, she answered on the 4th ring. "Hi, sweetie," she chirped, like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't ignored her grieving daughter for 6 weeks. I asked her, as calmly as I could, why no one came to the funeral. She paused, then said, "It just felt heavy. You know how your father gets. And Jason had a thing with Melissa's parents. It was just bad timing all around. Bad timing." I remember going completely silent, not out of politeness, but because I didn't trust what would come out if I opened my mouth. She filled the silence with a sugary suggestion. Why don't you come out for Thanksgiving this year? A change of scenery might do good. Thanksgiving. As if I could sit at that table, pass the cranberry sauce, and pretend everything was okay. I declined. And that, I think, was the moment they decided I was too much. After that call, the distance became official. I was removed from the family group chat. Mom unfollowed me on Facebook. Jason's girlfriend blocked me, though I'm not sure why. Suddenly, I wasn't invited to birthdays. My niece's ballet recital? No invite. My dad's retirement party? Didn't even hear about it until I saw photos online. I messaged Jason once, asking what was going on. His response: "You've just changed, Emily. Ever since Daniel passed, you're kind of a downer." A downer. That's what my grief was to them. An inconvenience. A mood killer. I started to question everything. Had I always been this disposable to them? Had the years of planning birthday parties, sending handwritten cards, flying home for holidays, did it mean nothing? I began to see the patterns. The favoritism I had always brushed off. The way my mother used to say, well, Jason's just sensitive when he snapped at her, but called me dramatic if I cried. The way I was expected to understand when they forgot my milestones, but was labeled selfish if I didn't show up for theirs. The signs were always there. But now, stripped of Daniel's quiet buffer and protection, they were unavoidable. One day, I was scrolling through Facebook and saw a post from Melissa, Jason's girlfriend. A baby shower. Their baby. Everyone was tagged. Even extended cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. Not me. Not even a message. I sat in the dark, shaking, staring at the screen, wondering how I'd become so invisible. And worse, how no one seemed to notice. In early spring, my landlord told me they were selling the building. I had 30 days to vacate. My savings were low. I was still picking up freelance work when I could, but my depression was unrelenting. I debated calling home. Maybe ask to stay for a few weeks, just to catch my breath. But the voice in my head whispered, "They won't help. You're not their priority." And that voice was right. When I finally mustered the courage to call, my mother answered, surprised, like I was a telemarketer. I asked gently, "Would it be possible to come stay with you for a couple weeks while I look for something else?" She hesitated. "Jason and Melissa are living here with the baby. We really don't have the space. You know how things are." I didn't argue, didn't cry, just said, "Okay. Thanks anyway." That night, I slept in my car, wrapped in a blanket Daniel's sister had knit for us as a wedding gift. It still smelled like cinnamon and lavender. It had been almost 10 months since my last real conversation with anyone in my family. By then, I was renting a small room in a shared house in Aurora, Illinois. I worked part-time at a flower shop, wrote copy for online brands at night, and lived quietly. No birthday calls. No family updates. Just silence. It wasn't peace. It was exile. And then one Tuesday afternoon, everything changed. I was arranging a bouquet for a last-minute funeral order when my phone buzzed in my apron pocket. It was an unfamiliar number with a local area code. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something in my gut said, "Answer." I wiped my hands on my jeans and picked up. "Hello." Silence. Then a voice I hadn't heard in nearly a year. "Emily, it's Jason." My heart sank, then jolted. It took everything in me to not hang up on instinct. I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from right now," he said. "But it's Mom." I didn't speak. "She collapsed this morning. Stroke. It's bad. We're at St. Luke's in Des Moines. They're saying she might not wake up." Silence on my end. Dad's falling apart. Melissa's with the baby. I didn't know who else to call. Who else? I wasn't even supposed to exist in their world anymore. I should have felt vindicated. I should have said, "Now you remember I'm your sister?" But all I could feel was a sick mix of fear and guilt and anger and something else. Something I didn't want to name. After a long pause, I said quietly, "I'll get there as soon as I can." The drive to Des Moines felt like time had folded in on itself. Every exit, Every gas station brought back memories of car rides with Daniel, his playlists, his dumb impressions of NPR hosts. And then there were flashes of my childhood. Sitting in the back seat with Jason, sharing earbuds. Dad humming off-key. Mom correcting everyone's grammar from the passenger seat. I hadn't just lost a husband. I'd lost a history. When I walked into the hospital, everything slowed. The scent of disinfectant, the echo of heels on linoleum, the humming of vending machines in the distance. Jason was standing at the nurse's station. He looked older, tired, a shell of the arrogant boy I used to know. When he saw me, his face contorted, relief, guilt, something in between. She's in ICU. They said no more than 2 at a time. I nodded and followed him through the double doors. There she was, my mother.
Pale.
Motionless. Wires everywhere. A woman I both loved and resented more than I could put into words. Dad was sitting in the corner of the room, head in his hands.
He looked up when he saw me.
There was a second of recognition, and then something broke in his face. You came. He stood, hugged me like a man who hadn't realized how much he missed something until it was back in his arms. I froze. Then I let him. Just for a moment. Jason stood awkwardly in the doorway. They're gonna do another scan in an hour. She's not waking up yet. He turned and left. I sat by her bed, stared at her face, so peaceful, so unfamiliar. And for the first time in months, I spoke to her. Softly. You didn't come to Daniel's funeral, Mom. You told me I was too emotional. You unfollowed me, blocked me from your life. I looked down at her hand. Thin, fragile, still wearing the same old wedding ring. And still, I'm here. I wept, right there in the ICU, with the woman who made me and broke me in the same lifetime. Over the next 3 days, I became the one holding everything together. I scheduled meetings with the doctors. I called extended family. I translated jargon no one else understood. I even held Melissa's baby while she cried in the waiting room. And slowly, something shifted. Dad stopped flinching when he saw me. Jason started asking me to sit with him for coffee. Even Melissa thanked me for staying.
But I wasn't doing it for them.
I was doing it for me. To prove I could show up, even for people who hadn't. On the 4th night, Jason approached me outside the cafeteria. You didn't have to come. I wouldn't have blamed you if you didn't. I sipped my coffee. I know. I didn't know how much you were holding until you weren't there anymore. He stared at the table. Mom, she didn't know how to handle your grief. None of us did. I laughed. Bitter. She didn't have to handle it. She just had to be there. He nodded. You're right. And I'm sorry. Later that night, Mom woke up.
Barely.
She opened her eyes, blinked, and when she saw me at her side, a tear rolled down her cheek. She tried to speak, but the nurse told us not to push her. Her hand twitched, and I held it gently. We just stayed like that for a while. No words. Just skin to skin. Mother and daughter. Years of pain unspoken, yet understood. 2 weeks after Mom's stroke, she was stable enough to be transferred to a rehab facility. The doctors said recovery would be long. Maybe partial. Maybe not at all. The family decided to hold a meeting at the house, Jason, Melissa, Dad, and me. It was the first time I'd been back in the home I grew up in since Daniel's funeral. The same creaky stairs. The same faded rug in the hallway. And yet, everything felt smaller. Or maybe I had simply outgrown it. Jason paced the kitchen, bouncing his baby daughter on his shoulder. Melissa typed into her phone, only half listening. Dad stood at the window, arms crossed. I sat at the table, watching them all, like an outsider who had somehow wandered into a movie set she didn't audition for. Jason cleared his throat. So, we need to talk about logistics. Who's going to help with Mom during recovery, scheduling PT, coordinating her medication, meal stuff, all that? I didn't speak. He glanced at me. I just assumed you'd want to handle it. There it was. That same casual entitlement. The assumption that I, the forgotten, the ignored, the inconvenient one, would be there to pick up the broken pieces. Again. I leaned back in the chair.
Calmly.
Why would you assume that? He blinked. Well, you've always been the organized one. And you don't have, like, a full-time job or anything. I cut him off. You mean I'm disposable? Jason looked at Dad, then back at me. No, I didn't say that. But you've acted like it, I replied, voice steady. You all have. For years. Dad stepped forward. This isn't the time to. I stood up slowly.
No, Dad.
This is exactly the time. Melissa looked uncomfortable, but I kept going. You erased me from this family. When I was grieving, alone, and barely surviving, you ignored me. When Daniel died, not one of you showed up. Not even a phone call the day of his funeral. Jason opened his mouth, but I didn't let him speak. I begged for connection. I tried to stay close. I sent photos. I sent updates. I planned visits. I asked, begged for someone to see me. And what did I get in return? Silence. Dismissal. Blocked on social media like I was toxic. My voice cracked, but I didn't stop. You replaced me with your new, shiny families. And now that you need someone to clean up the mess, suddenly I exist again. The room was frozen. Even the baby had stopped fussing. I reached into my purse and pulled out a sealed envelope. This is a letter I wrote to Mom after Daniel passed. I never sent it, because I knew she'd roll her eyes and call it dramatic. I placed it on the table. You can read it or burn it. I don't care. But I'm not your maid. I'm not your emotional punching bag. I'm not the helpful sister who gets a pat on the head when she makes things easier. Dad spoke up then, quietly. We failed you. I looked at him, and I saw it. The regret. The recognition. I don't know how to explain it. Maybe I didn't know how to be the kind of father you needed. I'm sorry. Jason stared at the floor. Melissa wiped her eye. No one moved. I picked up my bag. I'll check in on Mom when I can. I'll do what I can. But I'm not here to fix this family anymore. And I walked out. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't angry. It was final. A quiet reclaiming of a life I'd spent too long waiting to be invited into. 2 days later, I received a message from Jason. Just one sentence. I get it now. I really do. After I walked out of that house, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't replay the confrontation in my head, wondering if I had gone too far. I just exhaled. For the first time in what felt like years, I wasn't holding my breath around people who only saw parts of me. The helpful daughter, the emotional sister, the oversensitive inconvenience. I had spoken my truth.
Fully.
Without apology. And the silence that followed wasn't loneliness. It was freedom. In the days that followed, things were quiet. No follow-up calls. No more requests. No one pushing tasks or expectations on me. It was like the family machinery had stalled, uncertain how to function now that I had stepped out of my assigned role. But the space I had once filled with people-pleasing, I started to fill with me. I returned to my tiny room in Aurora, watered the plants Daniel and I once grew from scraps, dug out my old journals, lit candles just because, went on long walks with no destination. I wasn't healing, not yet, but I was listening to the quiet inside, to the version of myself I had buried beneath their approval. About a week after the confrontation, I got a voicemail from Dad.
His voice was slow.
Reflective. Almost soft. Hey your mom's been asking about you. Her speech is still rough, but she lit up when I told her you were there. She squeezed my hand. It's something. I don't blame you for anything. I know we've let you down. I know I have. Just if you ever want to talk, I'll be here. No pressure. I didn't call him back. Not right away. But I saved the voicemail. And I listened to it 3 times that night. Not because I missed him, but because for the first time, he didn't try to explain himself. He just acknowledged me. And that, in its own quiet way, was progress. A few days later, I bumped into Melissa at the grocery store. I almost turned around instinctively, but she saw me first. To my surprise, she walked over. She looked different. Tired. Human. Hey, she said, awkwardly. Hey. I wanted to say, I read your letter. The one you left for your mom. I raised an eyebrow. Jason showed it to me. Hope that's okay. I shrugged. It's fine. She hesitated. It made me think about my own mom. We're not close. Haven't been since I was 15. You made me want to write her. There was a pause. Also,
I'm sorry.
for how I treated you. I didn't understand. I do now. I nodded. No hug. No grand reconciliation. But sometimes, a real apology doesn't need a performance. Just sincerity. Later that week, I sat on a park bench with my journal and made a list. Not a to-do list. Not goals or groceries. A truth list. Things I had accepted. I can love people and still not let them back in. I can be kind without being silent. I deserved better, even when they didn't see it. Daniel would have been proud of me. That last one made me cry. Not because it hurt, but because I believed it. For the first time since he died, I didn't feel like a failure. I felt like someone becoming. Grief has this way of shape-shifting. At first, it's a storm, then a fog, then a bruise you forget about until someone touches it. But eventually, if you do the hard work, it becomes a scar. A reminder of what you survived. Not what you lost. It started with a cup of tea. Not a grand gesture. Not a spiritual retreat. Just a cup of lavender chamomile on a Thursday morning, sun hitting the corner of my rented room, and a moment of stillness that didn't ache. That's how healing begins sometimes. Quietly. Unannounced. I started going to grief support group at a local community center. Every Wednesday night. Hard plastic chairs, stale coffee, and 10 strangers whose pain felt eerily like mine. There was Angela, who lost her husband to a car crash. Tom, who hadn't spoken to his sister in 12 years. Maria, whose son had overdosed the year before. And then there was me, the girl who had lost a husband and a family in the same breath. I didn't speak the first few weeks, just listened. But one night, someone shared a story about not being able to cry at their partner's funeral and the guilt that followed. I raised my hand. I couldn't cry either. Not because I didn't care, but because I was too busy holding myself together in case no one else did. Angela reached across and touched my arm. That night, I exhaled in a way I hadn't in months. I also started seeing a therapist, Dr. Renee Wilson, a warm woman with short gray curls and a velvet voice that made me feel 10 years old again. In our second session, she said, "You didn't lose your worth when they stopped seeing you. You just lost your audience." That line broke me open. I had spent my whole life performing for a crowd that refused to clap. And now, I was finally walking off stage. I made new friends. Slowly. Carefully. One of them was Jasmine, a barista from the cafe next to my therapist's office. She always wore mismatched socks and asked deep questions like, "If your grief had a color today, what would it be?" We started hanging out, swapping book recommendations, going to thrift stores, baking at midnight. She didn't know the before version of me, only the present one. And somehow, that made it easier to be real. A few months into therapy, Dr. Renee asked, "What does family mean to you now?" I thought about it, and I answered, "It means people who stay, even when it's not convenient." That's when I started building my chosen family. People who texted back, who remembered my hard days, who didn't need me to shrink to be lovable. People like Angela, Tom, Jasmine, and even myself. I found purpose in unexpected places. I started writing again, not marketing copy or sad journal entries, but real, soul-stretching essays. I published a piece titled, "When Family Leaves You Behind," on a small online grief blog. It went viral. Comments poured in, messages from people across the world saying, "I thought I was the only one. You put my pain into words. Thank you." For the first time, my story wasn't a wound, it was a bridge. Later that year, I launched a tiny nonprofit project in Daniel's memory. Quiet Light, a grief support initiative that delivered care kits to widows and widowers in their first 30 days of loss. It was simple. A journal, a handwritten letter, a candle, a list of free mental health resources. No marketing, no big campaign, just one person reaching another in the dark.
And it grew.
People donated. Volunteers signed up. The press even did a small story on it. Daniel would have loved it, especially the name. Around Thanksgiving, Jason reached out. This time, not to ask for anything but to share. He sent a photo of Mom in her wheelchair, smiling as his daughter, my niece, painted her nails. He wrote, "She asks about you. I think she remembers more than she lets on." I smiled. Didn't reply right away. Later that night, I sent him a voice note. "I'm glad she's doing better. I'm doing okay, too. Thanks for the photo." It wasn't reconciliation, but it was something. A truce, maybe. Or the beginning of a boundary that didn't bleed. If you're still watching, maybe you've been there too. Maybe you know what it's like to grieve alone. To walk through the darkest chapter of your life and realize the people you thought would be there aren't. Maybe someone you trusted disappeared when you needed them the most. Or worse, maybe they acted like you were the problem. If that's you, I want to say this clearly. You're not too much. You're not dramatic. You are not hard to love. Your grief doesn't make you a burden. Your pain doesn't make you broken. And just because someone shared your blood doesn't mean they knew how to love your heart. I used to think family was forever. That no matter how bad things got, they'd always choose you. But sometimes they don't. And that's a wow no one warns you about. There's no funeral for the version of your family you thought you had. No ceremony for the siblings who forget you exist. No headstone for the parent who stops calling. No closure for the people who only show up when they need something. But here's the truth. You get to grieve them. You get to let go. And you get to rebuild something better. If no one else says it to you today, let me say it. I'm proud of you. For surviving heartbreak that no one acknowledged. For healing silently when no one checked in. For waking up and still trying to be kind in a world that didn't always return the favor. That takes courage most people will never understand. And if you're watching this with a lump in your throat or tears in your eyes, that's your body remembering every time you were made to feel invisible. Let it out. There is no shame in being the one who feels deeply. There is no weakness in needing people. And there is power in deciding that your worth does not depend on someone else's ability to recognize it. If you've lost people, to death or to distance, if you've had to grieve someone who is still alive, if you've had to learn how to mother yourself, comfort yourself, advocate for yourself, welcome. You are part of a quiet, strong, beautiful community. We're not loud. We're not perfect. But we are real. Drop a comment below, even if it's just a heart emoji. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me who you lost. Tell me what you're healing from. Let this be a space where your voice matters. Where your story doesn't have to fit a mold. Where you're not alone. And if no one told you today, you're doing better than you think. You are not behind. And you are not alone. Please like this video if it made you feel seen. Share it with someone who needs it. And subscribe if you want more stories like this. Stories that honor real pain and real healing. Until next time, stay soft, stay strong, and stay true to the person you're becoming. I'm Emily. And this was my truth.